Welcome to Season 2 of ADAC Answers, an education podcast for all. Produced by the Podcast Business News Network, hosted by Jill Nicolini. ADAC's mission is to empower K-12 school leaders and teachers to meet the individual learning needs of all students through customized, professional development and coaching services. Led and staffed by passionate, committed professionals, ADAC prides itself on delivering precise solutions to its clients' unique education challenges. ADAC stands for Attain, Differentiate, Advance, and Collaborate. 4 words we believe epitomize our work. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are excited to have our guest today from ADAC. And if you haven't met them yet, you will today. Some of the most important players here to talk more about their mission that empowers K-12 educators to meet the learning needs of all students. So welcome to the show today, gentlemen. How are we?
We're well. Thanks for having us.
All right. Do y'all want to start off by introducing who's who? Who would like to take the lead? We have Steve. I see you first.
Thank you, Jill. Nice to be with you again today. My name is Steve Perla, and I'm the president of ADAC.
Beautiful. Tom Olson, next up.
Yes, Jill, great to be with you again. My name is Tom Olson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ADAC, and along with Steve, a co-founder of the same.
Great. And Deacon, RJ, is it Dourney?
Dourney, yeah.
Dourney,
Jill,
sorry.
great to see you. Deacon RJ Dourney, I'm a member of the board of directors.
Perfect. And last but not least, Sean.
Yeah, Sean McGraw. I'm also a board of directors of ADAC Advocacy and happy to be part of the conversation today.
Perfect. And we have ADAC. We also have ADAC Advocacy, which I know, Steve, you're joining us here again. Great to see you. And you're going to remind us a little bit about, of course, ADAC's Advocacy's mission. Would you mind starting with that?
I'd be happy to, Jill. And our mission really is to help private schools access their equitable share of both IDA and ESSA services. And what are those? IDA really refers to special education, and ESSA is a whole range of programs that really provide both supplementary services to students who have educational needs, as well as professional development to teachers. So both these programs, of course, IDA and ESSA, are extremely important to our private school networks. And so we really assist them to ensure that they have access to these programs, because all of these programs are administered by the public school districts. And so you have to really establish a relationship with those districts and be able to work with them to be able to access those sources that are so critical to our students and to our teachers. Beyond that, we also assist families who are in fact having their children evaluated by public school districts to determine whether or not they have a special education need. And as a result, a lot of these families will need some help in that navigating that process. So we actually provide an advocate for that family and to really provide the support that they need to navigate the whole bureaucracy. And for oftentimes, it's a daunting task for that family when they have their child evaluated to determine whether or not that child has a disability. So that's really our focus, both at the macro and micro level.
All right. Do you want to talk a little bit, Tom, about the typical client that ADAC Advocacy does serve?
Absolutely, Jill. And Steve's answer to the first question almost in some ways intimated an answer to that I'm about to give. But our clients really consist of private schools, but also private school networks. Importantly, when it comes to the work of advocacy, it's important to conduct and to do that work at the administrative level of a private school or at the administrative level of a private school network. And when I refer to network, I'm really referring in many ways to maybe terms that your listeners would be more familiar with: Catholic diocese and archdiocese.
Okay.
So, for example, Catholic schools offices in a Catholic diocese or archdiocese would oversee all of the schools within any given Roman Catholic diocese. And so that's a network level operation. In the Jewish day school world, there's also various Jewish day school networks as well. And so we endeavor to work with not only networks, but also individual schools. And then, as Steve also mentioned, on the child find family advocacy side, of course, we're working with individual families. And that's really where our work becomes very personally meaningful for individual families and students who are simply trying to attain for their children the services federally funded to which they have lawful access.
Beautiful. And by the way, how can we reach you all? Could you share the website?
Absolutely. The website for ADAC Advocacy Foundation, which again is a nonprofit, and I know you'll be talking in a few moments to a couple of our board members who we're really happy and lucky to have serving on our board for that nonprofit. But the URL website for the URL is www.theadacadvocacy.com. So one more time, www.theadacadvocacy.com, www.theadacadvocacy.com.
All right. Would you mind sharing maybe some recent success stories from ADAC Advocacy?
Absolutely. Steve, I'll have you take that question.
I'd be happy to, Jill. So I would say our biggest successes, one, in the last year or so, we've been able to garner over about $50 million in new funds for kids who need special education services in private schools. And that's over the past year. And by the way, those funds are renewable every year. So it's not like a one-time find. So that's really important. The second area that I would point out is in our work, we really try to establish partnerships with state departments of education because they really have the authority to oversee, if you will, the implementation of these federal programs. And so our intent really is to try to work with them to address the systemic issues that we identify as we work in the field. And as a result of that work, we're now beginning to do joint trainings with these departments. For example, last week, we did a joint training of public and private school leaders along with the Illinois State Department of Education. We had ADAC personnel, the Illinois State Department of Education there, and we were training both public and private school leaders in terms of how IDA is supposed to be implemented. And we have done that sort of training in other states as well. And it just really makes a major difference because what you have happening in that dynamic is you have both public and private school leaders hearing the same message and really understanding how the law is to work. But also what happens is that you begin to be able to form relationships because you have the public and private school leaders together in a really comfortable environment. And it's really important that those relationships get established so you can really work in partnership and in collaboration. And the last thing I will say is we've had many in the last year child find successes where families who have gone through the process who otherwise perhaps would not have had their child identified as needing special education services. And as a result of the good work of the folks in our team, in particular, Kate McConnell, who leads up that division for us, have really made a difference in terms of many of these children's lives. And for us, all of this work, really, Jill, is about kids. We talk about policy, we talk about bureaucracy, we talk about process, but we keep our focus really on what difference are we making in these children's lives, because at the end of the day, that's really what makes the difference.
All right. Thank you so much. And Sean, what motivates and excites you, if you don't mind me asking, on serving as on the board of directors of ADAC Advocacy? Would you mind sharing that question?
Absolutely. You can't help but listen to Steve and Tom and understand why you want to be involved, right? I think for most of us, when you join something, it's because usually mission and people. And I think it's a great combo here because what Steve and Father Tom and their team have really done is like, this is really about access. And we all know I've been an educator for over 30 years at every level. I now teach at the university level, but I've worked at all other levels. And I think that we all know that education is getting to know young people as each of them as individuals and helping them to realize who they are, what their full potential is. And we also know that there is a ton of barriers that get in the way of that, whether it's poverty or physical or mental or certain kind of characteristics that people have or their social context, whatever. There's all kinds of barriers. And I think that what Steve and Tom have created is, no, let's remove as many barriers as possible. And let's give each child the opportunity to become who they deserve to be. And we know that has to happen in the classroom. It has to happen in schools. It has to happen in systems. And they're really on the front lines of doing all of that. So that's the mission, but also the people. I think I've known Steve for almost 20 years now, and Father Tom close to that, and getting to know others on the team. But like Steve, one of the things I love about Steve, and not to highlight him because it's really a team, but is this ability to take, we all know we have these issues, but like at the end of the day, you have to develop the relationships. You have to get what is it like on the ground, and also understand the data. What is the data? Because people are like in the sphere, but one of the things Steve does, he actually knows what's going on the ground. He says, this is what we said we wanted to do, but this is what's happening, and how can we bridge the gap? And so Steve and Tom and others are really good at that. And so that's why I'm thrilled to be part of the team.
Great. Thank you. Great answer. And also, we're going to ask you the same question, Deacon. Please, if you could share what motivates you to serve on the board as well.
Sure, Jill. I'd offer three things. The first, the work that ADAC Advocacy does touches me very closely as a father. I have three daughters. One of my daughters lost her eyesight in high school. So I learned firsthand the importance of advocacy. It's a challenging journey to take. And now I see the work that ADAC Advocacy is doing. And as a dad, I'm grateful that they're out there. Second, I'm a recently retired CEO. And I look in organizations, whether I participate in the board of directors of public companies or nonprofits, I look for great leadership, passionate leadership, but particularly individuals that know how to affect change. And that's what with these men. And lastly, it's a combination of both a need and a vision for how to impact the need that's out there. And that's, you've heard Steve talk, you've heard Tom talk, they get this in spades, they really do. And lastly, I'm a permanent deacon, and I am called to serve, and particularly serve the needs of the least of our brothers. And while not always the case, so often the young people that we're talking about, they may not have an advocate other than the folks at ADAC Advocacy. So by the grace of God, I'm able to help.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And let's talk a little bit more, if you don't mind, about how you hope ADAC Advocacy might be able to achieve during the short term. So for you, Deacon RJ and Sean, I don't know who would like to take that question first.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. Jill, if I look first at the short term, there's a beautiful opportunity here to forge a path, which the men and women of ADAC Advocacy already started, to make an impact in the lives of young people, but more importantly, to also help both the private schools as well as school districts in understanding the importance of ensuring that certain benefits are afforded these young people. You know, the federal government has done, I think, an outstanding job of putting together laws and also availability. And they don't always understand how to do that. So breaking out, continuing the path that they're already on, and ensuring that young people are helped. And we're seeing this across the country, which is beautiful.
Great. Thank you for that. And last but not least, would you like to add to that too?
Yeah, sure. I think in the short term, very similar to what Deacon RJ said, I think that in the short term, I teach politics. I'm a political science professor, and I teach how we make laws and how interests and institutions collide and how do we affect change, whatever. But at the end of the day, you can design things as well as you want, but it's how they're implemented is where the rubber hits the road. And I think that's where, again, the short term, as Deacon RJ talked about, it's really compliance. So there was this design to say, okay, we need to serve kids with special needs. We need to serve kids who have under-resourced communities or families. We need to do that. And so again, we have these laws, they're there, but in terms of like how they're getting implemented there's a lot of disparity. And I think that one of the things that ADAC is doing is really not coming in there and telling, oh, people are doing things wrong or they have bad intentions. It's that people aren't necessarily aware this is actually how it's supposed to work and how it can work. And so I think in the short term, it's really educating people, making people aware of these are the laws, these are the resources, and this is who's eligible for them. And then you bring in the advocacy, as we already talked about. But so for me, I think the compliance is a huge part of it. And really, as you get into it, it's making people aware, but also it's changing kind of the hearts and minds and realizing, because again, institutions, the danger of institutions is we have resources and it's like a zero-sum mentality. And I think it's getting people out of the zero-sum mentality to be like, no, let's go back to the focus on kids. How do we get the kids that need these resources the most, that opportunity? And I think once you develop those relationships and start to break it down for people are like, whether it's public schools, private schools, whatever, oh no, it's about the kids and we can all row together. And I think that's a big part of what ADAC has been able to do. And in the short term, that's a primary goal that I see ADAC being able to influence change on.
Steve, how many total board members are there, if you don't mind me asking?
There's 9 altogether, Jill.
Okay.
Yes.
So hopefully
And
we get to meet some of them next time too. But go ahead.
absolutely. I was going to say both Deacon and Sean raised, I think, very important points. And the thing I just like to comment on is the work that we have done in the field. What we have found is really just a lack of awareness on both sides, both the public and the private schools. So the work that we're trying to do is really trying to educate both groups, both the public school leaders and the private school leaders. The public school leaders have a really good grasp on how IDA, special ed law, is supposed to be implemented in the public schools. Their focus is not private schools. So it's understandable to some extent why they wouldn't really fully have a sense of how this law could be implemented. And so we're trying to really educate both groups with the hopes, again, of getting these kids served. The other thing I would say, too, that we have found, Jill, is that there's certainly in some states, about 8 across the nation, there are some state laws that have been implemented. And on the surface, those state laws are actually in some ways more generous than the federal law. However, what happens oftentimes is that these state laws become somewhat of a barrier, surprisingly, to having IDA fully implemented. And unfortunately, in many of these cases in these states, our kids are being shortchanged even more so than in those places where these laws don't exist. And I could go on and on. I'm just making the point, though, that education and really understanding what's happening on the ground is really important to help these students get access to service.
And did you want to add anything new that's been happening in the world of our children that are in this need that you've been helping? Is there any updates? I know it's been a little time since I've seen you, but anything that you want to share that's important to everyone?
I think just maybe to highlight in very concrete terms what the issues look like on the ground. So we're doing a statewide project in Pennsylvania. And in the state of Pennsylvania, there's 242,000 private school students, and only a little over 4,000 kids in those private schools have been identified as needing special education, which means is 1.8%. Now, that number is just absurd on its face because the national average, at least in Catholic schools, is about 7%. And of course, in public schools, it hovers between 15 and 16%. So to think that in any state where you have 242,000 kids, that only 1.8% have been identified, on its face, there's a problem. To make it even more, I think, clear, in the entire city of Philadelphia, the data is suggesting that there's only 26 kids, I want to underscore this, 26 kids who have been identified as needing special ed in all the private schools in Philadelphia.
Wow.
That is absurd on its face. And I just point this out because I think it just really highlights the challenge that we have. So that's what we're working with, and that's what we need to change. And
I want to raise the point that Steve has made about Pennsylvania, Jill. Pennsylvania is a particularly complicated state because there's a relatively generous state law called Act 89 in Pennsylvania, which over the years, actually Act 89 is older than IDEA by a year. Act 89 was 1974. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act was signed into law in 75. So in many ways, Pennsylvania is ahead of the curve in terms of recognizing that there are students with special needs and their needs should be met and we should be serving them. In many ways, that Pennsylvania has been exemplary in that regard. The problem has been both in Pennsylvania and in other states that have since passed state-funded special education laws. There has been some conflation on the part of, again, public school officials, no fault of their own, because this stuff is confusing. But the confusion becomes elevated when state law can also muddy the waters of access. And it's too complicated and far too nuanced and probably would bore your listeners to death if we were to go into the way these state laws have a negative effect on access to the federal law. But just to state that states like Pennsylvania that are very generous relatively speaking, to serving the needs of all students. Sometimes, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and right. And I think that's an apt phrase, because in the case of Pennsylvania and in other states where there are generous state entitlements, it oftentimes makes access to IDEA in particular far more laborious. And that's something else that ADAC Advocacy obviously tries to work through and clarify. And to the points that Steve and RJ and Sean have already made, clarify for not only private school folks, but also public school folks. Because as we've said now ad nauseum, at the end of the day, we're all going to be aligned about ultimately what are we doing our work for, and that's to serve these kids. Whether you're a private school person, a public school person, a charter school person, a homeschool person, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's all about the kids. And then on that commonality is really the baseline from which we then try to disentangle that which needs to be disentangled and enable access where access is not being afforded.
Got it. Thank you. We still have some time left here on the clock. What else would you like to add for today's conversation?
I might add one thing in terms of a longer term goal. Obviously, there's obviously we've talked a lot about the policy side, and I think that part of being on the ground, affecting change, and seeing what's there is also to report back then. So when you're starting to reauthorize these bills, we have a better understanding of not only what the resources are there, but guess what? If we had more resources, there's always want more resources, right? But like in targeted ways, how can that affect change? And so I think that's one thing. But the other thing is, I think there's a danger is that, like, when we think of special ed in particular, sometimes it can be, education is costly, but special ed can be even more costly. So there's a sense for a lot of private schools, hey, we can't do it. We don't have the resources, and they should just go to the public schools. And I think that part of what ADAC Advocacy is reminding private school leaders that you have a responsibility and you can do it. You know what I mean? Rather than being like, oh yeah, well, it's too hard for me, let's send them somewhere else. It's no, we can do it here. We actually have the belief and the capability. And now we actually have access to resources that you can do it, and you don't have to send them somewhere else. And so the very kids, going back to what Deacon RJ said early on, like, we want to go to the margins. And a lot of times private schools and Catholic schools in particular that I've been familiar with are serving kids on the margins. I remember once being in Memphis, and someone was being challenged because they're like, wait, 95% of the kids in the schools aren't Catholic, and you're in their Catholic schools. And the leader was like, we don't teach them because the students are Catholic. We teach because we're Catholic. It's part of our motivation. And I think that the danger is that we have kids that are on the margins and we serve them in so many other ways, but rather than being like, oh, we can't do this, we actually can do it, and we can do it in-house. And now with access to resources, we can demonstrate that we can do that. And then others will be like, oh, the hearts and minds open up and be like, we can do this, and we should do this, and we will do this. And I think that's a longer term goal for what ADAC Advocacy is trying to do.
Yeah, Jill, staying with the long term, I guess I would add two things. First, to continue to refine this replicatable model that can be deployed nationwide. The second is to state what we all know. The federal government, particularly Congress, they're continually in need of discipline experts. And I think what we've heard today from Tom and from Steve is clearly they are. And what we need is them to work with Congress to help eliminate barriers to parents in private schools being able to equitably access IDEA funds, so that's individuals with disability education, and ESSA funds, which are Every Student Succeeds Act. Making sure that all of these kids, each of these individual students, have the opportunity to access these funds, and that needs to happen at a congressional level. And these are the folks to do it.
All right. In our last 3 minutes together, what else did you want to add for today, everyone?
Just to play off what Deacon just mentioned and Sean, the idea of working with Congress is very important, because we had conducted a national study on behalf of the Bishops' Conference looking at IDEA nationwide, and all the work that we're doing now in about 20 states at the moment. We just have great data.
Yeah.
When we go to Congress at some point, when they in fact take up reauthorization, because they are going to be taking up reauthorization perhaps after the presidential elections, it won't happen prior to that. And this will be a very important moment, because I think we finally have some really good on the ground data that can make a difference, because there are a lot of barriers inherent in the law. And I think at this juncture, I think we have the experience, the data, that we can really help educate Congress to revisit some of these barriers and really amend them and modify them and make sure that these kids have real access.
All right. And if we want to get involved, could you share the details of how that works, the website, and any contact information?
Yes, again, the website, www.theadacadvocacy.com, all one word, the ADAC, ADAC, advocacy.com. And on that page, of course, you can find information about our services, our mission, and there's also a page dedicated to each of our staff members who are team members, leadership team members who are on that website and who are doing the work of ADAC Advocacy. Kate McConnell, Ariella Hellman, and Julie Cantillion. And so they are available via the website as well from our team page.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for being here, for joining us. A pleasure getting to meet some of you, see some of you again. And I guess until next time, what is our topic for next week? Do you happen to know offhand, Tom?
Yes,
Steve?
it's social emotional learning. I believe it's our final episode with you folks at PBN.
Already? Oh my God. It
Yes.
was about 10 episodes. It's been a while.
10, 11. We have 11 episodes, and
Oh
I just
my
want to
goodness.
commend and convey to you, Jill, and to your team at PBN how much we've enjoyed. ADAC has enjoyed participating in this 11-episode podcast series, and so we're looking forward to going out with a bang next week with Diana Schlosser, who's on our team, who works on the ADAC, the for-profit side, with one of the social emotional learning services that we provide to private schools throughout the country. So we're looking forward to that final conversation with you next week.
Same here. So ADAC Answers will be back next week. Thank you again for this, everyone, and looking forward to that conversation. And thanks for all the insight and input. And as a host, as a mom, as just a person learning so much about all that you do. It's fascinating with all the help. And I know children are super important to all of us. And I appreciate you all being here and everyone that I've met so far. So thank you so much. Have a great day. Okay, gentlemen?
Thank you.
1 in 5 children in the United States have learning differences, making it more challenging than ever to be a teacher or school leader. At ADAC, we empower K-12 educators to meet the learning needs of all students through customized professional development and coaching services. Learn more at www.theadac.com. That's THEADAC.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of ADAC Answers. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about ADAC, please visit our website, www.theadac.com. That's theadac.com. You can also find us on Facebook and LinkedIn.